The First Grader is a biographical drama film released in the year 2010. The plot of the film follows the true story of Kamani Maruge, an 84-year-old Kenyan farmer and veteran warfighter who, after hearing the news of free education announced by the Kenyan government, enrolls himself in a primary school in 2003. He fights for his right to attend school for the first time and receive the education he previously could not afford, inspiring a whole new generation of people to do the same. The film starts with a prologue explaining that in Kenya, there was a violent uprising against British colonial rule in 1953, led by Mau Mau, who were mainly from the Kikuyu tribe. In this violent struggle, thousands were killed and more than 1 million Kikuyu were imprisoned in British detention camps. The conflict eventually led to independence, but for many, the past was never resolved. In 2003, an 84-year-old villager named Kamani Maruge is shown working in the fields and reminiscing about his younger self. The scene cuts to a disc jockey announcing over a Kenyan radio station that the Kenyan government is offering free education for all citizens who can turn up with a birth certificate. The news of free opportunity spreads like wildfire, and students from all over Kenya, along with Kamani Maruge, decide to take it upon themselves to seek an education. They rush to the primary school where the government officials and teachers enroll the students based on their birth certificates. Chaos prevails at the school as all the parents go crazy to enroll their children in the school. Amidst the stampede, Jane Obinshu, the principal and teacher, is informed about Maruge's arrival. She approaches him to inform him that free education is for children, not adults. Maruge shows her the newspaper with a bulletin stating, "Free education for all," and argues that he heard on the radio with his own ears that the government announced free education for everybody with a birth certificate. Jane's teaching colleague, Alfred, explains to her that they already have limited seats for the kids and that they should not waste a seat on a man who is in his dying age. He then asks Maruge that if he wants to get into the school, he needs to have a book and some pencils. Jane feels bad for the old man and asks him to leave. The next day, when it is the first day of school for the new kids, Maruge arrives yet again and is repeatedly brushed off by Alfred. Jane asks Maruge why someone as old as him wants to go to school. Maruge expresses his desire to learn how to read. However, Jane disregards his interests and asks him to leave. Dejected, Maruge goes home and recalls memories of his service during the Mau Mau uprising against the British in the 1950s. Meanwhile, Jane informs her husband Charles about Maruge, who discourages her from supporting his educational dream by calling him senile. Charles then mentions that he is offered a full-time government job in Nairobi and expresses that he really wants to consider it. He suggests Jane come with him to the city and they start a family together, but Jane turns down his request as she does not want to leave her school and students. Later, following Alfred's criticism, Maruge buys the school supplies to support his educational endeavor. He buys a piece of cloth and stitches it to make a school uniform for himself. He also buys a pair of old shoes and polishes them to make them wearable. The next day, Maruge dresses up for school and arrives at the school gate. Jane, who already is exacerbated by the lack of school resources, is informed by Alfred about Maruge's arrival. She meets Maruge and is impressed to see his persistence to study. She discards Alfred's suggestions and, being the head of the school, accepts Maruge into the school. She welcomes him into her class and introduces him to the students. Considering Maruge's weak eyesight, she allocates him a front seat so he can see the board clearly. While teaching the class alphabet, Jane sees Maruge holding the pencil on his wrist and guides him on how to hold it properly. After school, Maruge is disappointed to see people mocking him after seeing an old man in school uniform. At night, when completing his homework, Maruge hears someone knocking on his door. However, it turns out that he's hallucinating as his service in the army has left him with PTSD when he witnessed his people being treated inhumanely. The next day at school, Jane asks Maruge to write a number on the board, but Maruge seems dazed and disoriented. When he's asked to sharpen his pencil, he is once again haunted by memories of the war and falls to the ground. Jane escorts him out of the class to avoid any scene in front of the students. After calming down Maruge, Jane realizes that he might be getting overwhelmed by school life and asks him to drop out. Maruge explains to her that he was imprisoned in the Mau Mau detention camps by the Britishers, which is why he's experiencing hallucinations. When Jane inquires more about it, Maruge walks out of the conversation to complete his classwork. A flashback scene reveals that the young Maruge once invaded a Britisher's house and committed a murder. Back in the present, Maruge's hallucinations lead him to recount his struggling life's story to the students. He tells them how he fought for freedom from the Britishers and starts enchanting for freedom. Jane is worried to see the students getting influenced by Maruge. Another flashback scene reveals that Maruge was once brutally beaten by the British invaders and forced to renounce his oath of allegiance, but Maruge refused to comply. Back in the present, a news reporter clicks photos of Maruge while he's at school to create a story out of it. Soon, the news of an old man going back to school reaches the masses, and more so when a disc jockey announces it on the radio. Meanwhile, Maruge's class fellow, Kamau, starts envying him after Maruge earns Jane's praise for excellent performance. One day, Maruge sees a boy beating another boy. This triggers him, and he starts beating the boy aggressively. Jane and Alfred stop him from doing so, and just then, Mr. Caputo, the superintendent of the school district, arrives at the scene after hearing about the controversy of Maruge attending the school. He expresses his disapproval to keep Maruge in a primary school and demands Jane let him leave instantly. Jane tries to explain to Caputo that Maruge had a troubled life and now he deserves to get proper education, but all of her words go to vain. Maruge then argues with Jane on tribalism, revealing that he had a family with a wife and 2 children who were killed by the British. Jane is moved by Maruge's life story and feels that she must help him. While talking to her husband, she expresses her concern for Maruge and tells Charles that Caputo is adamant about sending Maruge to an adult school. Charles suggests Jane not get her head deep into this as it can cost her career. Ignoring her husband's suggestion, Jane goes to meet the head of the education board to fight for Maruge's rights. However, the judge discards her request by saying that if she allows Maruge to attend primary school, other adults will also follow, which will eat up the precious resources assigned to the children of Kenya. Having no other choice, Jane expels Maruge from the school. Later, Maruge is forced to attend an adult educational facility where he is surprised to see the misled youth who has no motivation or ambition to study. He goes back to meet Jane, who sees through Maruge's motivation to study. Maruge requests her to teach him how to read as he has a letter that he wants to read himself. Jane tries to convince Caputo to let Maruge study at her school but is once again rejected. She insists Maruge go to the adult school, but he declares to never go back there. Maruge goes to his former class to bid the children farewell, and seeing him interacting with the children civilly, Jane decides to hire him as her teaching assistant. Soon, Maruge's story gains publicity and attention. He's stormed by the local press asking him about the motivation behind studying. Maruge explains that he realized that the power is in the pen. To read and understand is a way of finishing poverty. Jane feels proud of Maruge and is elated to have her school's name highlighted in the press. Contrary to what Jane thought about Maruge's story outcomes, it becomes a controversy that sets to grow after many parents become outraged as they feel that such a valuable place should not be wasted on such an old man. They storm outside the school, protesting to oust Maruge from the school. Jane tries to explain to the furious parents that Maruge has a lot to teach the students, but they refuse to listen to any of her justifications. Seeing the havoc, Caputo arrives at the school and warns Jane one last time to get rid of Maruge. Maruge is heartbroken to see the people speaking against him and can't stop reminiscing about his wife, the love of his life. He then goes into a flashback of the time when his wife and children were shot dead in front of his eyes, and he was unable to help them. The scene cuts to Kamau's father arguing with Jane after she informs him about Kamau's poor results. He blames Jane for not paying attention to his son and only thinking selfishly about the old Maruge. After school, while Jane is giving Maruge a private lesson, Kamau peeks into the classroom. Soon, Jane receives an anonymous phone call inquiring about her private teaching lessons with Maruge and threatening her that she's being watched. One day, a group of politicians visit the school and one of the aides demands Jane give him a cut from the money. Jane expresses her cluelessness about the situation, and it turns out that everyone thinks Jane is getting money from the press for giving fame to Maruge's case. Jane informs Charles about the situation, prompting him to come back from Nairobi. Soon, Charles starts getting anonymous calls misleading him that his wife is having a secret affair. Soon, the villagers start believing that Jane and Maruge are seeking fame and fortune at the cost of the children. Kamau's father pays a bunch of thugs to attack Maruge in the classroom without hurting the children. Maruge scares off the thugs by beating them with his stick. Later, Maruge befriends Kamau after helping him out with his weakness in math. Following negative reaction and acts of vehemence towards the school, Jane soon receives a letter that she is to be relocated to another school 300 miles away. She informs Charles about it, who insists she resigns from the school and rejects the transfer so they can spend time together. However, Jane refuses to resign and give Caputo satisfaction as a matter of principle. This creates a rift between the couple as Jane is bent on fighting for herself rather than sitting quietly at home. Charles becomes infuriated and reveals to her that he is getting random calls day and night informing him about a secret affair his wife is having. Jane is heartbroken and can't believe that people can stoop so low. She refuses to comply with Charles and decides to take the transfer. Later, she goes to meet Maruge and tells him that she is getting transferred. Maruge offers to tag along so she can continue giving him teaching lessons, but Jane refuses and makes it clear that she cannot fight any more battles. Following Maruge's growing questions, she tells him that her husband will remain in Nairobi and that she and Charles have gotten used to a long-distance relationship. Maruge apologizes to Jane for causing her trouble and is forced to think that maybe he is too old to study. Jane explains to him that it is not his fault and also narrates her father's quote to keep Maruge motivated to study, which says, "Learning never ends until you have got soil in your ears." The next day, Jane attends her last day at school and bids farewell to the students by giving a heartfelt speech. The students who are fond of Jane shower her with many gifts. Meanwhile, Maruge packs his stuff and leaves the village. Caputo informs the students about the new head teacher, Grace Muthumba, and requests them to be nice to her. On the other hand, Maruge boards a bus for Nairobi to appeal to the education board. Grace arrives at the school and is welcomed with slippers and stones by the children who protest to get their old teacher reinstated back at the school. Grace is disappointed by the disobedience and indiscipline of the students and quits despite Caputo's resistance. Meanwhile, Maruge arrives in the city and goes to see the chairman of the Board of Education. Evading the chairman's secretary, he storms into the chairman's office and demands justice for Jane. He shows the board the scars and cracks given to him by the British to make a point that the children need good teachers to study. He makes a moving statement in front of the board by saying that we reap what we sow with our children, and demands they bring Jane back to the school. He returns back to his village and resumes farming. Soon, Jane is reinstated at the school and is welcomed with open arms by Maruge and the students. Later, Maruge requests Jane to read the letter to him. Jane sees the letter and hands it to Alfred to read. Alfred reads the letter, and it turns out that it's an appreciation letter from the government thanking Maruge for enduring so much pain to liberate his country from British rule. The film ends with an epilogue stating that Maruge holds the Guinness World Record for being the oldest person to start primary school. He was later invited to the United Nations in New York to give an address to international leaders about the power of education. Maruge inspired a whole new generation to go to school for the first time, and he died in 2009. Before the credits, the disc jockey is shown excitedly announcing on the radio about Maruge's visit to the UN and declaring that Kamani Maruge has become the headmaster of the world. This movie has a rating of 7.4 on IMDb. I hope you all liked this video. If yes, then make sure to like, comment, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel for more movie recaps.